How do you make a sequel to one of the best games ever made? It's an almost impossible problem. The history of gaming is filled with sequels that tried to replicate the stunning success of an original idea, only to fall miserably short of that goal. There's a tension between past and present, between expectation and reality, that often leaves us feeling disappointed. These are not failures of talent or effort or even vision. Sometimes you just catch lightning in a bottle and you can't catch it again. But sometimes lightning strikes twice. Supergiant Games has, by now, established a sterling reputation that spans more than a decade, earned through the release of a string of what the kids call bangers. Games like Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre were all critical darlings, but they remained on the fringes of the gamer cultural consciousness. Respected, well-liked, but not widely played. Supergiant was the kind of indie developer that seemed destined to create high-quality, consumer-friendly games that would be ignored by the majority of gamers simply because they didn't come from one of the big developers. Supergiant wasn't AAA, it wasn't EA or Activision or Rockstar. Its games would never capture the attention of the broader gaming community. And then, in September 2020, everything changed. The first Hades game is nothing short of a triumph. It is in no way, shape, or form hyperbole to call it one of the best games ever made. Look, it says so right here on the wiki page. Hades didn't necessarily revolutionize roguelikes so much as perfect the concept. It was one of the first roguelikes to have a cohesive story, something gripping and engaging that effectively utilized the gameplay structure to enhance that story. Playing as Zagreus, the son of the titular Hades, you fought your way through the labyrinthian Greek underworld with visually stunning renditions of places featured throughout Greek myth. Tartarus, Asphodel, and Elysium were beautifully rendered and animated with gorgeous hand-drawn art, to go alongside with an incredible combat system that tied player power thematically to the various gods and goddesses of Greek myth in such a satisfying way that it has me immediately wanting to start screeching about ludo-narrative harmony. To attempt a follow-up to that game is beyond daunting, yet a sequel is what was demanded. Gamers are a thirsty lot. We get a taste of something breathtaking, something almost impossible in its quality, and we're never satisfied. There always has to be a sequel. There always has to be more game, more content, more abilities, more weapons, just more. Irrespective of thought or intention, the faceless masses demand more. And so often, we're left disappointed. Unsurprisingly, sequels are rarely as good as their originals. I love Halo 2. It's a fantastic game, but it's also hard to argue that Halo 2 does anything truly different from its predecessor. Halo 2 is the refinement of an existing game. It provided new content, new story, a few new weapons, but it's mostly the same as the first Halo. The same hero, the same villains, many of the same weapons and enemies. For everything that was new, there was something else that was old and familiar. It's the trap of a sequel. If you make something truly revolutionary, it's hard to follow up with something even more revolutionary. Often the safe bet is simply to do the same thing with a few new twists and call it a day. So, when Supergiant sat down and began pre-production on Hades 2, they must have had to address the enormous elephant in the room, the question that is begging to be asked, the question that I asked at the start of this video. How do you make a sequel to one of the best games ever made? Frankly, the smart choice would have been to not make a sequel at all, to make a new game that uses the same principles and ideas, but one that is simultaneously free from the shackle of expectation that comes with trying to follow up what is, in the truest sense of the word, a masterpiece. This challenge is core to the heart of what makes Hades 2 so good. Because it would be easy, understandable even, for Supergiant to just make Hades again, but more, to give us Zagreus as the main character with a few new boons and weapons to go along with everything else from the previous game. That version of Hades 2 would have sold 1 million copies and received almost as much adoration and applause as the first game. But that's not what Supergiant did. Instead, they took a gamble. They reworked the entire game, creating a new main character with new weapons, new aspects, new gods and goddesses alongside fully revamped versions of the gods from the first game, with a much different story with new themes and new supporting characters. At every opportunity, at every fork in the road, Supergiant decided not to just challenge themselves to make another Hades, but a new Hades. A game that shares the same basic foundation as the first, but uses that foundation as an opportunity to do something different. This is a decision inherently fraught with risk, though. Deviating from an existing formula that not only works, but works so well it created one of the best games ever is, in a word, ballsy. There's a confidence that you need, an almost arrogant level of self-belief that you can do it again, but better. And for the most part, they did. Hades 2 is as much of a triumph as the first game, equal to or surpassing the original in almost every conceivable way, with one very notable exception. We'll get to that. And honestly, and obviously, that is the most impressive part of Hades 2. By reworking some game systems and rebuilding the gameplay loops from the ground up, Supergiant both preserved the quality of the first game and fixed its few minor problems. This is not just a sequel, but also basically a guide for other developers on how to effectively follow up a fantastic game. There's a balancing act at play here between what feels familiar and what feels new, and it's orchestrated to such perfection that Hades 2 can be both a game that borrows heavily from its predecessor in terms of foundational gameplay and story mechanics, yet functionally completely different, offering a plethora of new builds, new weapons, and new characters to culminate in a new game that arguably surpasses its seemingly perfect predecessor. So join me as we discover the blueprint for a sequel. Part 1. Bones. Sequels are built on the bones of the previous game. The most important question is, how much of the old is present in the new? Rely too much on tried and true methods and end up with a stagnant product that feels indistinguishable from the previous game in all the wrong ways, but do too much different and you lose the identity from the original. It's funny, when I first played Hades 2 a month ago, all I could notice were the differences between Hades 1 and Hades 2. New boons and gods, reworked old boons and gods, new weapons, a new main character, a new hub area, new regions. There's seemingly all of these ways that Hades 2 is not really all that similar to Hades 1, and yet it never really felt that way to me. Sure, the boons may be different, but it's still the basic gameplay loop of buffing your attack, your special, and your cast with the various gods as you progress through the underworld, gradually increasing your power until either you beat the final boss or die and start over. The basics are virtually unchanged. The Mirror of Night may be gone, but it's been replaced by Arcana, which provide basically identical benefits. There's still Nectar and Ambrosia to progress NPC questlines, there's still fun cosmetic improvements to make to the hub area. You can make an argument that maybe Hades 2 doesn't do enough to change from the foundational formula of the first game. But this similarity is critically important to retaining the same feel and familiarity from Hades 1. There's a kind of push-pull interaction happening between changing up the gameplay and story to provide something meaningfully different while still being identifiably a Hades game. Hades 2 is a masterclass in this respect, not only carrying over gameplay systems, but retaining art style, story structure, and expanding the setting. It almost becomes beside the point that so much of the original game is changed because firing up your first run at Hades 2 just feels so familiar to Hades 1. Zagreus and Melinoe have very little in common as characters, and the supporting cast is completely changed from the first game, but spending time talking to the denizens of the crossroads like Odysseus and Hecate, the iconic Hades art style, unlocking and upgrading weapon aspects, and the whole structure of each run is similar enough to provide the concrete feeling that, yeah, this is a sequel to Hades. But that similar foundation, these bones, don't result in a game that feels too much like Hades 1, and in reality, Hades 2 is a much different game, because outside of those bones, they changed fucking everything. Part 2. Changes. Hades 1 and Hades 2 share a lot in common from a systems perspective, but this foundation is simply used as a starting point to end up in a very different place. Melinoe has different weapons, aspects, and access to new boons like Hestia or Hephaestus, and while, like I mentioned earlier, returning gods like Ares and Zeus have been significantly reworked to result in fundamentally different playstyles. In Zeus's case, his main attacks no longer do chain lightning and instead provide a debuff called Blitz, which deals a large amount of damage after a certain damage threshold has has been hit. This results in a kind of curse-based gameplay where Zeus is no longer the main feature of a build, but a supporting aspect to enhance other gods. New gods like Hephaestus offer a very unique kind of gameplay built around high damage attacks and specials, with long cooldowns that can be reduced through increased rarity and palms. Combined with some interesting utility like a boon that makes your Hephaestus attacks apply a debuff that increases damage taken from all sources, and you have a completely new god with a unique playstyle based on high damage, long cooldown attacks that retain build synergy with different gods depending on which weapon aspect you choose. These new gods and changed old gods create a mountain of potential new builds whilst mostly invalidating old builds from Hades 1. The new weapons and their aspects have a sort of multiplicative effect to this, as each aspect changes a weapon and allows for new playstyles that were previously clunky or underpowered. For example, the Circe staff grants a psychic link between Melinoe and her animal companion that does a significant amount of damage, but also causes her cast to occur both where she is positioned, but also where her animal companion is positioned. This not only radically changes gameplay from other weapons, but also incentivizes new playstyles. Cast can only be used once every few seconds, and while psychic link is a good source of damage, it hardly does enough on its own. So in order to get more damage out of the build, you can increase your charged attack or special and seamlessly weave them into your rotation. Because effectively utilizing the Circe staff requires a strong cast ability, having good position with your animal companion both for secondary cast and for the psychic link is extremely important to unlocking Circe's max potential, and like with the Hephaestus boons, this unique playstyle is just not present in Hades 1. Speaking of animal companions, this is another one of those reworked mechanics from the first game. In Hades 1, you eventually unlocked something called legendary keepsakes, which provided a limited high-use damage ability or utility. Something like the Megara keepsake, which did a massive amount of damage in an AoE, but you could only use it a handful of times. In Hades 2, these legendary keepsakes have been changed into animal companions that are persistent NPCs that follow you around for the entire run and have very interesting and unique benefits. Tula, the cat, provides an extra death defiance, instantly completes fishing minigames, and does a shit ton of damage whenever she happens to be awake, because her special mechanic is that while her attack does do a lot of damage, she's a lazy fucking cat who keeps going to sleep in the middle of the battle. In fact, the primary way to buff her is to increase the amount of attacks she does before she goes back to napping. While these new animal companions don't radically change the gameplay, except for the Circe staff, it is another example of Hades 2 reworking boring or clunky systems into something more interesting. Companions are available near the start of the game, unlike legendary keepsakes, and have legitimately useful benefits. The dog gives more max mana, the frog more maxed health, and the bird also adds a passive critical strike chance. In essence, legendary keepsakes went from being a sort of tacked-on, underdeveloped system into something that fits well into the existing gameplay loop and provides consistent value. Speaking of reworked gameplay systems, cast has been fundamentally changed. In Hades 1, casts were limited to the amount of blood shards you had, and you couldn't cast again until you had picked up your spent blood shards. In Hades 2, blood shards have been completely removed, and casts are only able to be used again after their duration expires. But taken in combination with the addition of mana as a resource that can be used to charge the new Omega attacks, casts become a lot more dynamic and interesting. Now you don't have to keep hunting down your blood shards, and the new charged casts have powerful effects like immobilizing enemies or adding new damaging effects. The introduction of mana has had some really interesting knock-on effects too, like certain vows being tied to reducing max mana or certain boons having a downside that restricts mana, resulting in some very interesting build dilemmas. The last major addition to Hades 2 gameplay loop is the charged or Omega attack, which provides a different ability depending on whether attack, special, or cast is charged. These charged attacks have a moderate mana cost and a wind-up time, which makes it difficult to just spam them. Depending on the weapon or aspect, new Omega attacks are added, like the Black Coat's Nyx aspect, which adds a charged sprint ability that detonates on impact and gives a buff that causes attacks and specials to attack twice per hit. Other Omega attacks are build-defining, like Ignium's Charged special, which creates 2 orbiting projectiles that can, with Moros' aspect, detonate your attacks for a large explosion. This interaction is core to how Moros' aspect works, and effectively utilizing it can result in one of the highest DPS builds that I've personally seen. With 3 or more unique Omega attacks per weapon and interesting Arcana interactions like increased charge speed, slow time during charge, and damage increase to attack and special when not at max mana, the game pushes you to not just specialize in one kind of damage type, but to branch out and expand your build diversity to include more types of boons than you might normally have done in your typical Hades 1 run. Part 3. Impact. Ultimately, the impact of these changes is significant. While the structure of each Hades 1 run remains relatively intact in Hades 2, the way those runs play out in moment-to-moment gameplay is shockingly different. Hades 1 had a focus on developing only one of your 3 damaging moves, thereby minimizing the need to use anything other than the attack you had just buffed to hell and back. This was often best accomplished by using a god-specific keepsake best suited for your build, which would then guarantee the presence of that god in the first room a boon could spawn in at the start of each region. Take a Zeus build from Hades 1. These builds use a plethora of different boons, but most of them were geared around buffing the main attack, which, with the right boons, completely deleted the screen and combined with keepsakes was pretty easy to put together. Additionally, the air quotes optimal way to play Hades 1 often ended up minimizing the random aspect of build crafting. Between rerolls from room rewards and god keepsakes, it was often very easy and incentivized to create a specific build that circumvented the randomness that is core to the roguelike experience. Hades 2 solves almost all of these gameplay problems. While god-specific keepsakes and room rerolls are still in the game and are probably still a very optimal way to play, the new keepsakes, specifically the Jeweled Palm and Calling Card, provide incredibly powerful bonuses. Things like guaranteeing level 4 boons and the ability to upgrade rarity on a boon up to 6 times, but these powerful bonuses are only available if you don't use god-specific keepsakes and rerolls for the entire run. Which means not only can you acquire these insanely powerful buffs, but they're there for the entire run, allowing you to stack all 3 and then have a 4th keepsake active for the final region. The increased emphasis on randomness, especially once you acquire the aforementioned Palm, Timepiece, and Calling Card, serve to highlight all of the new builds and reworked gods. Suddenly relying on a specific strategy by using god keepsakes and rerolls causes you to accept the opportunity cost of not being able to reliably level up your boons. You can't turn powerful boons into heroic with Calling Card, or acquire huge sums of gold with Kronos' Timepiece. This makes experimenting more fun in Hades 2. The gameplay is designed around making better use of the full kit of each weapon instead of focusing on a specific move, allowing for fluid and dynamic gameplay with attacks that set up and interact with other attacks in a synergistic way that is immensely satisfying to execute at a high level. But it's also more fun because there's just more boons and gods than in Hades 1. Hades 2 doesn't remove any of the gods from the previous game, but it does significantly rework them. This means that in addition to trying out new gods like Hera or Hestia, you can mix in those gods with boons from previous gods that have been reworked. One of my favorite builds at the start of Hades 2 was a dual Zeus-Hestia build that leveraged Blitz on special and Scorch on attack to trigger the dual Hex damage buff on top of Melanoe's aspect of Limb and Oros, which provided fast attacks and a double damage backstab. It probably wasn't the most optimal build, but properly constructed, it absolutely shredded most of the bosses in the game, but only by combining lots of different types of damage and attacks, anything from fast-hitting normal attacks to apply Scorch, to charge specials for a mass application of Blitz, which would trigger and detonate for massive damage. I didn't rely on just one attack, utilizing anything from damage over time, large single hits, fast low damage attacks, and curses. I don't mean to intimate that Hades 1 was incapable of this kind of build crafting. You absolutely could make builds like these. It's just that these kinds of builds happen much more organically and frequently in Hades 2 because of how the game incentivizes you to try more varied builds through the reworked gameplay systems, combat, and redesigned boons. All in all, the impact of these myriad changes from Hades 1 to Hades 2 provide the meat of what makes this gameplay so different from Hades 1 in spite of some pretty big similarities. But while Hades 2 from a gameplay perspective fixes almost all of the minor problems of the first game, its story is another discussion. Part 3, Problem Child. So, in the intro, I mentioned that Hades 2 arguably surpasses Hades 1 in almost every way except one very notable way. That one way? The story. It's bad. Well, maybe bad isn't fair, but it's boring. Hades 1 had a really interesting story that challenged popular conceptions of the gods from Greek mythology and focused on the complicated familial relationships that Zagreus maintained with not just Hades, but all of the characters around him. It wasn't the most original story, but it was a really interesting concept with unique execution through applying modern family dynamics onto the mythological Greek gods. Hades 2 is just a bog-standard go kill the big bad story, except you don't even get the payoff of actually defeating the big bad. Very briefly, Melanoe starts the game having trained for all her life to defeat Kronos. She starts her journey, learns more each night as she progresses further before eventually defeating Kronos, only to realize that in order to permanently defeat him, she must go to Olympus and defeat Typhon. There's some more shenanigans involving Zagreus and time travel, but eventually we defeat Kronos and Typhon, only for the game to step in and say, well, actually you defeated one version of them, and in order for the space-time continuum to function, Melinoe has to keep endlessly killing Typhon and Kronos, or something. It's kind of baffling, honestly. The narrative in Hades 1 was excellent and did a pretty damn good job of harnessing the unique gameplay aspects of a roguelike to tell an engaging story, but Hades 2 is actively hampered by the gameplay structure and doesn't really do anything particularly engaging or interesting from a narrative perspective. Melinoe doesn't have the fun flaws and relatable character traits that Zagreus has. She doesn't have a complicated relationship with her mother or father. She doesn't have the same kind of emotional character progression that Zagreus has, from immature teenager to relatively mature adult. She's basically a Mary Sue. She finishes the game in the same place as when she started, needing only to learn that she won't 360 no-scope Kronos on the first try, and that with a little persistence, she'll succeed in her goals. There's a power progression, but as a character, Melinoe may as well be trapped in stasis with everyone else. The problem this story has is that we can't actually resolve any of these plot points, or there wouldn't be a need for the game to continue. So instead of trying to resolve this obvious point of tension between gameplay and story, the game just deus ex machinas it away. I think maybe literally? Don't even get me started on the fucking fates. Jesus, what a letdown. Although, I did really enjoy their voice actresses. The story is mostly forgettable and at times annoying, but doesn't really do too much to drag down the gameplay experience unless you were more interested in the narrative than the gameplay. In which case, I bet this video is really annoying given how much I like Hades 2. This video is called Hades 2 is the Blueprint. And what I mean by that is that Hades 2 is a blueprint for how other developers can approach making a sequel, a way to guide the decision-making process about what stays and what goes from game to game. I'm not opposed to sequels that don't change a ton. I brought up Halo 2 earlier, but maybe a better example would be God of War Ragnarok, which in many ways is the exact same game as God of War 2018, with the same weapons, the same abilities, the same setting, the same characters, the same hero. You get the point. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's kind of boring. I played God of War 2018 a lot. It's one of my favorite games. I spent hundreds of hours on it between PS4 and PC. Yes, I bought it twice. And by the time God of War Ragnarok came out, I was kind of burnt out on that game's combat. There's some stuff that's done to change up the gameplay, like a new weapon and giving POV chapters to Atreus, but in many ways, God of War Ragnarok suffers because it's too much like the original. But there is this fine line to walk, and it's hard to nail that balance between old and familiar. Hades 2 is so good because it's basically the platonic ideal of navigating that particular tightrope. The gameplay is superior to the original. It's stuffed with new content, new weapons, new enemies, new bosses, and new challenges through the updated Vow of Night system, but still feels recognizably like the original game. Hades 2 isn't a perfect game, and I think the narrative being a pretty significant downgrade is probably proof that it isn't holistically better than Hades 1, but it's hard to overstate just how difficult it is to balance a game like this, to introduce all of these new boons and weapons and enemies and then make it work just as well, arguably better than one of the best games of all time that's lauded specifically because its combat is amazing. That's an achievement that I think few developers can claim. I think it's clear that Supergiant has entered the same hallowed ground that developers like Santa Monica Studios and From Software have. Not just capable of making a great game or even a few great games, but decades of hits with few or no misses. Hades 2 is a triumph, not because it's perfect, but because it takes some pretty big risks, and for the most part, those risks pay off, resulting in a game that made me enjoy Hades 2 just as much as I enjoyed Hades 1. There's no burnout, there's no repetition, it's a new game that feels like the old game without any of the downsides that statement implies. A development strategy so flawlessly executed that it may as well serve as a blueprint, a guidebook, a signpost, and yes, this metaphor has been brutally tortured, just like Prometheus, but I think it effectively illustrates my point. I hope other developers look at how Supergiant made Hades 2 and take a few lessons from it, and we get much better sequels as a result. Thanks for watching. It would mean a great deal to me if you would hit the like button and subscribe. Every little bit of engagement helps YouTube promote my videos. Be safe, everyone. I'll catch you in the next one.